She screamed the words that split my heart open. "We are not your servants." I lay weak after surgery, stunned that my own daughter could speak to me that way. In the house I helped her build, I had become a burden instead of a father. I thought of all the years I had sacrificed for her, never imagining the day would come when blood would turn its back on me. The evening light fell through the wide kitchen windows, soft and golden, touching every polished surface in my daughter's home. From where I lay on the sofa, I could see the glimmer of the granite countertop, the neat row of wine glasses she had bought for her dinner parties, and the faint reflection of myself, an old man in recovery, half hidden in the glass door of the cabinet. My body ached from the surgery. The stitches tugged each time I shifted. I was supposed to rest. I was supposed to heal. I cleared my throat gently, not wanting to be a burden, and said, "Sweetheart, could you bring me my medicine from the counter? It's time." My voice wasn't loud. It carried like a whisper in a large house. I thought she hadn't heard me at first, because she kept chatting with her husband near the dining table. But then she turned, her face tightening, and she let out words that cut deeper than the surgeon's knife. "We are not your servants," she screamed. The sound froze the room. Even the neighbor, who had stopped by to drop off a borrowed tool, turned his head in surprise. My son-in-law's jaw tightened, as if he wished the words had come from him instead. I lay there, unable to move quickly, unable to defend myself, feeling the sting of humiliation crawl across my skin. I tried to speak, to explain, but my lips felt dry. "I only needed the pills," I said, almost to myself. The room stayed silent, heavy as stone. My daughter shook her head, arms crossed, as if she were the one who had been wronged. "You can't keep expecting us to wait on you every minute. You have 2 legs, don't you? You're not helpless." I looked at my legs, still trembling, wrapped in the loose sweatpants the hospital had given me. They did not feel like mine anymore. The doctor had said it would take weeks before I could climb stairs without fear. Weeks before strength returned. But to her, it was just inconvenience. The neighbor muttered something under his breath, an awkward goodbye, and slipped out the door. My son-in-law reached for a beer in the fridge and avoided my eyes. And me. I sank deeper into the sofa, clutching the blanket tighter, wishing my late wife had been there to see what had become of the child we had raised. I thought back, just for a moment, to the nights when she was little. When fever burned her cheeks and I stayed awake with a cool cloth pressed to her skin, whispering that everything would be all right. To the mornings I left work early to sit in the school auditorium, clapping the loudest when she sang in the choir. To the day of her wedding, when I gave her the gold watch that had belonged to her mother, placing it gently in her hand as a symbol of love passed down. She had cried that day and hugged me as if I were the most important man in her world. And now, this. I forced myself to breathe slowly. "I didn't mean to trouble you," I said. The words felt small, a fragile defense against a storm. She didn't answer. She turned away, her laughter forced as she spoke again to her husband, as if her outburst had been nothing more than a fly swatted from the air. I stared at the ceiling, the shadows moving across it as the evening deepened. The warmth in this house was not mine. I could feel it in every glance, every whispered word I wasn't supposed to hear. I was a guest in a place I had helped them build, and somehow I had overstayed my welcome before I had even unpacked my bag. The pill bottle still sat on the counter, unopened, just a few steps too far for me to reach. And though my throat burned with thirst, though pain ran steady through my side, I did not ask again. I would not risk hearing those words a second time. Outside, the crickets began their song. Inside, I lay still, my chest heavy, my heart heavier. The house smelled faintly of roasted chicken, dinner almost ready, but no plate was meant for me. The sofa had become my corner, my boundary line. And so the first night of my recovery passed, not with comfort or care, but with a shout that would not leave my ears, a reminder that the blood I thought would always protect me had grown cold. I didn't sleep much that night. The pill bottle still sat on the counter out of reach, its white cap glinting under the under-cabinet lights like a small, distant moon. The house settled in the way big houses do, ducts exhaling, a stair creaking for no reason, the refrigerator humming through the dark. My stitches pinched whenever I drew a deeper breath. I pulled the blanket up to my chest and stared at the ceiling, and old years came back as clearly as if someone had turned on a projector in my mind. When my wife, Ellen, died, the world changed its weight. That first winter, my daughter was 10. The plows left a ridge of snow like a wall at the end of our driveway. I didn't have a snowblower then. I had a shovel with a worn wooden handle and a brown wool cap Ellen had knitted when times were still gentle. I shoveled before dawn, then walked to the bus depot where I worked the early shift, fingers cracked with cold, coffee cooling too fast in a paper cup. The depot had a particular smell, diesel and brake dust and something like pennies, and I used to come home carrying it in my clothes. My girl would wrinkle her nose and laugh, and I would hold my arms out wide and say, "Hug your old man anyway," and she would. I learned to braid hair by watching a video the high school put online for dads who were trying their best. On choir nights, I ironed her dress myself, careful around the buttons because Ellen had once burned a shirt right there and laughed for an hour about it. I packed lunches with little notes. "You got this. Mom would be proud." I kept them short and clumsy because I didn't want the words to make her cry in a cafeteria full of other kids. On Sunday afternoons, we visited the park. There's a picture somewhere of her on the swing with the sun behind her, hair lit up like wheat, her head tilted toward the sky. I still see it when I close my eyes. Money was never enough, so I made it enough. I took weekend deliveries for a local hardware store and a month-long night shift at a packaging plant when her braces needed paying. I sold the aluminum fishing boat I loved more than I should have loved a thing. I told myself it was just a boat, but I stood there in the driveway and watched the taillights disappear and felt like I'd given away my last quiet place. That same week, she needed new cleats for softball. We found a pair on sale, and she ran in place in the aisle just to feel the studs grip the carpet. She was so happy you'd have thought I'd bought her the moon. Our house then was small, the kind that kept warm easily because it had to. The kitchen table was scarred with nicks from school projects, and one sweet, careless summer when she painted birdhouses with Ellen and forgot to lay down newspaper. After Ellen was gone, I couldn't scrub those rings of blue and yellow out. I tried once, and the cloth came away stained, and it felt like I was erasing laughter, so I stopped. When she turned 18, we sat at that same table and filled out forms for community college. I remember the way she looked at me when the financial office called to say the deposit needed to be in by Friday. "Dad," she said, "I don't know how we'll do it." I did. I always did. I picked up an extra route for the hardware store, delivering mulch and concrete bags in a truck with a stubborn second gear. She ended her first semester on the dean's list. We celebrated with store-bought cake and paper plates, and she kissed my cheek, and I pretended not to wipe away tears. When a young man with careful manners asked to marry her, I bought a suit from a chain store and learned how to fold a pocket square from a YouTube video. I told her to stand still in the living room, and I pinned her mother's brooch to the bouquet. After the ceremony, I pressed Ellen's gold watch, our wedding day gift from a cousin who had nothing but gave everything, into my daughter's palm. She looked at it like a small sun had landed in her hand. "Mom would want you to have it," I said. She hugged me with the fierce certainty only the young possess and whispered, "I'll take care of it forever." There was music and lanterns strung across the yard, and for a night the world had the right weight again. Life moved. That's the kindest way to say it. They rented first, then talked about buying. We sat with a loan officer who wore a tie with loud stripes and a smile that made promises I knew belonged to paper more than people. "It'll be tight at first," my daughter said, squeezing my hand under the desk. Tight at first became tight always, as it does. I helped where I could. Down payment money from the account I'd been pretending wasn't meant for me, a few quiet transfers when their car needed brakes, an envelope here and there when the holidays ran long. I kept no ledger beyond the one in my chest. A father keeps score with pride, not numbers. I don't know exactly when our small town began to feel like it belonged to a different century, but I know the sound of it. The plant closed. The bus depot cut shifts. People who knew my name by the shape of my shoulders moved away. The church potluck thinned. I took a custodian's job at the elementary school for a while because mops don't need to know your history, and floors always reward patience. The pay was steady enough to settle the surprises that come with roofs and old plumbing and young marriages. I sent what I could, and when I couldn't send enough, I told myself this was what family looked like when it stretched. It would be easy to say I gave too much, but that's the same as saying she asked too much, and the truth is rarely that simple. There were mornings she called just to tell me the apple trees they'd planted had taken root. There were nights she drove across town with soup when I caught a winter cough. On the 4th of July one year, we sat in lawn chairs in her driveway and watched fireworks crest above the school stadium, cheap colors exploding, and she leaned her head on my shoulder the way she had at 13. "You're my favorite person," she said. And I believed her, because believing your children is a habit of the heart. Time does what time does. Knees get loud when you climb stairs. Eyes need stronger light to read the sports section. Doctors start to recognize you in the hallway. When the surgeon explained what needed cutting and how long recovery would take, my daughter put her hand over mine and said, "You'll stay with us till you're back to yourself." We made a plan. I turned off the lights in my house and stood in the doorway longer than I meant to. Dust floated in the last beams, like slow snow. On the fridge, under a magnet shaped like a cardinal, was a photograph of the three of us at a lake. I left it there because it seemed steadier than taking it down. The procedure went as the doctor said it would. There was pain. There was the slow waking in a bright room. There was the half-comfort of warmed blankets and the murmur of nurses who had seen every kind of human story. I came home to my daughter's place with a canvas bag full of marked pill bottles and a paper with instructions so plain a child could follow them. Rest, hydrate, don't lift more than a gallon of milk. The sofa was soft, and the blanket she laid over me smelled like fabric softener and a hint of lemon from the hardwood cleaner. I felt safe enough to let my eyes close. It didn't last, but for a little while it did. For a little while there were small kindnesses. A glass of water without me asking, a television show we could all agree on, the dog curling up against my feet because dogs don't know anything about pride or history, only warmth. She even brought out the gold watch one afternoon and held it in her palm as the light moved across the face. "I still wear it on special days," she said, "not for chores." We laughed, and I stared a moment longer than I should have, thinking of Ellen's wrist, of how the watch had ticked through storms and holidays and small mercies. But houses and hearts have weather, a call here, a bill there, a long day stacked on a night of poor sleep, and the small kindnesses got outnumbered. I asked for help at the wrong moment. I asked while a pan was smoking on the stove, or the dryer buzzed, or a phone pinged. I told myself I would wait till a better time. Pain does not respect a family's calendar. It taps when it wants, and you either answer or you pretend you didn't hear it. I learned to swallow requests and turn them into silence. That evening, when the neighbor stopped by and laughter filled the doorway, and I saw myself reflected small in the cabinet glass, it all swept together. The years of shovels and schedules, the braces and books, the suit with the pocket square, the loan officer's striped tie, the quiet deposits, the lawn chairs on the 4th of July, the way the watch glowed in a sunbeam just days before. It all stood up inside me at once. And then came the words that didn't fit any version of us I recognized. We are not your servants. I lay there in the dark, after everyone had gone to their rooms, and the house had remembered how to breathe slowly. The past and the present sat across from each other like old men at a card table, neither willing to fold first. I told myself it was just a bad moment, a tired mouth saying what a good heart didn't mean. I told myself she had always been kind at the core, and that stress had a way of putting a crack in even the sturdiest cup. Maybe that was true. Maybe it wasn't. Either way, I rested my palm against my ribs and felt the thud of a heart that knew the long shape of love and the shorter shape of disappointment. And I promised it I would listen. Somewhere between midnight and morning, I must have slept. When I woke, the pill bottle was still on the counter. The house smelled faintly of last night's roasted chicken, and the watch, in memory if not in hand, ticked on. I swung my legs to the floor and waited for the room to steady. Outside, the sky was just turning the color of pearl. I thought of all the years that had brought me here, one foot after the other, the quiet math of ordinary sacrifice, and I decided I would stand on my own if standing was asked of me. Not because I didn't need help, because I needed dignity more. I called softly for my daughter, and heard no answer. The dog lifted his head and thumped his tail once against the sofa. I smiled and patted him. "Easy, boy," I said. "We'll figure it out." I reached for my cane, the good wooden one I bought from a craftsman at the farmer's market, because it felt like holding someone's hand. The day waited. So did I. Morning light filled the kitchen, pale and gray, washing across the polished counters and the chrome appliances my daughter loved to show off. I sat quietly on the edge of the sofa, cane at my side, waiting for someone to notice I was awake. The pain in my side reminded me I wasn't ready to move much on my own. My daughter came down the stairs in a rush, heels clicking, phone in hand. She didn't look at me. "We'll pick something up later," she said to her husband, tossing her coat over her arm. I cleared my throat. "Could I have a little more of the rice from last night? I didn't eat much dinner." She froze for just a second, then gave me a tight smile. "We don't really have enough to go around, Dad. Just eat what's left in the pot." Her husband chuckled softly and opened the delivery app on his phone. 10 minutes later, the smell of fast food filled the room, rich and greasy. They laughed together at something on the screen as I ate my plain, reheated portion alone. That afternoon, a knock came at the door. Friends of my son-in-law, young men with sharp haircuts and louder voices, filed in with beer and jokes. My daughter looked at me as if I were an old photograph someone had forgotten to put away. She whispered quickly, "Dad, could you go upstairs for a bit? It's embarrassing for you to be sitting here like this." The words stung more than I thought words could at my age. I nodded slowly, picked up my pillow, and climbed the stairs one step at a time. Each creak under my feet felt like a reminder that I no longer belonged where I once was invited. From the top landing, I looked down. They were laughing in the kitchen, the sound of cans opening, the bright chatter of young people living in a house that had no room for me. Upstairs, I found myself in the small spare room, not much larger than a closet, my belongings stacked in boxes against the wall. My cane leaned against a chair, and I sat there, listening to the muffled party below. I stared at the window, where the late sun stretched across the blinds, making long stripes on the floor. In that striped light, I felt like a ghost in a home that carried my fingerprints, but not my welcome. Later that night, when the house grew quiet, I walked back down to fetch a glass of water. On the way, I overheard my son-in-law's voice drifting from the patio, low and careless. He's got nothing left, just a pension check and his stories. Living with us is more weight than it's worth. Another voice laughed in reply. At least you've got the extra space. Think of it like charity. I stood frozen by the sliding glass door, my hand pressed to the frame. The man talking was the same man whose down payment I had quietly covered years ago. The house itself would not have existed without me. And yet, here I was, spoken of like a burden, a charity case. I turned away and shuffled back to the sofa without saying a word. I lay awake a long time, my hand resting on the blanket, the memory of Ellen's laugh echoing faintly in my mind. She would have known what to say, how to soften the sting. All I could manage was silence, and the steady truth that I had become a stranger in my own family's home. The house had grown quieter after the weekend gathering, but the silence carried no comfort. It carried distance. I moved carefully around the rooms, cane tapping against the hardwood, each sound a reminder that I was not wanted in the spaces my hands had once helped pay for. I told myself not to listen so closely, but ears learn things whether you want them to or not. One evening, as the sun dropped low and painted the walls a dull orange, I sat near the bottom of the stairs, waiting for my daughter and her husband to finish their talk on the patio. The glass door didn't close all the way, and voices slipped through. My son-in-law laughed softly, but his words weren't soft at all. He doesn't have anything left, just a pension check and stories nobody needs to hear. Living with him here is dead weight. The words floated into me like ice water. I stayed still, though my grip on the cane tightened until my knuckles whitened. My daughter's voice answered, quieter, but no warmer. I know, but what do you expect me to do? He's my father. At least people think we're generous, letting him stay. Generous, that was the word. I swallowed hard, feeling my throat catch. The house we stood in, the very deck they were speaking from, had been made possible only because I emptied savings when they couldn't make the down payment. But to them, my presence was charity. Later that week, I stumbled across another wound, this one sharper than the first. I was in the living room when I noticed the glow of my neighbor's phone through the window. He was showing something to another man, pointing and laughing. The image caught my eye. A photograph of a gold watch listed for sale online. I knew that watch. Ellen's watch. The one I had placed into my daughter's palm on her wedding day. My chest tightened until it was hard to breathe. I leaned on my cane and asked my daughter gently that night, "Have you seen your mother's watch? The one I gave you years ago?" Her eyes darted away for a second, then back to me. "Oh, that old thing. We're decluttering, Dad. We don't have space for boxes of sentimental junk." "You don't need to worry about it." "Junk?" The word fell heavy. "It's just a watch," she said briskly. "You shouldn't hold on to the past so much." I wanted to tell her what that watch meant. How Ellen had worn it on their first Christmas together. How it had ticked through lean years and richer ones. How it had been the one thing my wife insisted our daughter should carry into her own family. But the words stayed in my throat. I only nodded slowly, retreating into myself like an old tree folding against the wind. Days passed, each carrying a new weight. Meals were small and quiet for me. Sometimes, when they thought I wasn't listening, I heard whispers about expenses and tight budgets. And yet I would find receipts on the counter. Steakhouse dinners, shopping bags, designer sneakers. My daughter once told me, "We can't keep buying extra groceries for you, Dad. It's just not practical." That same afternoon, I watched them unload cases of craft beer and imported cheese from the back of their SUV. The difference between their words and their choices cut me. It wasn't the money itself. I had never cared about that. It was the casual dismissal of the man who had given so much for them. One Saturday, family came over for a cookout. Neighbors, cousins, some of my son-in-law's friends. I sat at the end of the picnic table, cane resting across my knees, listening. My daughter lifted her voice for all to hear. "It's been hard, you know, caring for Dad after his surgery. But we're managing. We've sacrificed so much, but family comes first." Laughter, nods, voices praising her. "You're such a devoted daughter," one woman said. "He's lucky to have you." I stared down at my plate, the baked beans, cooling, untouched. Lucky. I wanted to laugh, but the sound would have broken into pieces. I let them speak, let them believe the story she wanted to paint. She basked in their admiration, while I sat silent, invisible, stripped of the truth. That night, I lay awake in the small spare room, my cane propped by the door, the faint tick of the clock filling the dark. I touched the empty place on my dresser, where Ellen's watch had once rested when she took it off at night. My daughter's voice echoed in me, not as a whisper, but as a blow. "It's just a watch." It wasn't just a watch. It was her memory, my promise, our history. And now it was gone, traded away like something cheap, erased from the story of our family, as if it never mattered. I whispered into the stillness, "Ellen, I'm sorry. I tried." My voice shook, not from the surgery this time, but from a deeper wound, one stitched not with thread, but with disappointment. And so the days moved on, each heavier than the last. Words spoken in carelessness had cut deeper than the scalpel ever could. Wounds to the body may heal with time, but wounds to trust, to memory, to dignity, those sit longer, waiting. The summer cookout had been planned for weeks. My daughter wanted to show off her backyard, the new deck furniture, the grill her husband bragged about to anyone who would listen. By noon, the yard was full of folding chairs, paper lanterns strung between the maple trees, and the smell of burgers and hot dogs sizzling over open flame. Neighbors came, cousins I hadn't seen in years, and a few of my son-in-law's co-workers, their voices loud and confident, their shirts crisp as if ironed just for the occasion. I sat on the far end of the picnic table, cane propped against my leg, paper plate balanced on my knees. The food tasted fine enough, but it carried no flavor when eaten in silence. Around me, the air was warm with laughter, clinking glasses, children chasing one another across the lawn. For a moment, I almost forgot myself, letting the sound wash over me. But then my daughter's voice rose above the rest, clear and deliberate. "It's been hard," she said, standing with a plate in her hand. "Caring for Dad after his surgery. We've sacrificed so much, but family comes first." The circle of guests murmured in admiration. One woman leaned closer, saying, "You're such a devoted daughter. He's lucky to have you." "Lucky," I whispered under my breath. I stared down at the beans cooling on my plate, my hand tightening around the plastic fork. I wanted to lift my head, to tell them what life in this house had really become, that the man they thought was lucky had been sent upstairs like an embarrassment, fed leftovers while takeout bags crinkled in the trash, told his wife's watch was junk and sold like clutter. But the words never left my mouth. I stayed still, invisible, letting the false story take root in the minds of people who didn't know better. A cousin clapped my daughter's shoulder. "You've really stepped up." "Not everyone would do what you're doing." She smiled modestly, lowering her eyes in a practiced way. "Well, we all make sacrifices for family." Sacrifices. My chest burned at the word. My entire life had been one long chain of sacrifices. Every dollar saved, every hour of overtime, every dream set aside so she could build hers. Yet here I sat, painted as the burden, while she stood painted as the saint. At one point, my son-in-law added his piece, chuckling to the men gathered around the grill. "We've had to cut back a lot since Dad moved in. Groceries, utilities, everything's doubled. But we manage. We make it work." One of the men shook his head. "You're a good man. Most wouldn't take that on." The group nodded, their approval heavy in the air. I gripped my cane until my hand shook. I wanted to tell them the truth, that the very mortgage for this house had been cushioned by my money, that my pension checks had gone to their bills for months at a time. But my voice stayed buried, crushed under the weight of pride and shame. A child tugged at my sleeve, my granddaughter. Her eyes were wide, her small hand sticky with melted popsicle. "Grandpa, why aren't you sitting with everyone else?" Her innocence sliced through me. I forced a smile. "Grandpa's fine right here, sweetheart. Go play." She ran off, her laughter trailing behind her. I watched her chase the dog, her hair glowing in the sunlight, and I thought of her mother at that age, my daughter, chasing fireflies in the yard of our old house, Ellen's voice calling her in for supper. I wondered where that little girl had gone, and how she had grown into someone who could twist sacrifice into shame. The afternoon dragged on. Photos were taken, stories shared. I remained in my corner, a prop in the background, proof of the story they told, that they were caring, generous children, making space for an old man. Each compliment they received felt like a nail hammered into the coffin of truth. When the guests finally began to leave, I helped fold a few chairs, though no one asked me to. My daughter waved to her friends, her smile radiant, her hand light on her husband's arm. I shuffled back inside, the house cooling as evening shadows spread across the walls. Later, as they cleaned the kitchen, I overheard my daughter laugh. Everyone was so impressed. "They think we're saints." Her husband's voice answered, smug and low. "Let them think it. It keeps the sympathy on our side." The words landed heavier than the summer heat. Sympathy. Saints. I climbed the stairs slowly, one painful step at a time, until I reached my small, spare room. I sat on the edge of the bed, the cane across my lap, the window cracked to let in the evening air. Outside, fireflies flickered like little lanterns, glowing and fading, glowing and fading. I whispered to Ellen's memory, "They're not caring for me. They're burying me alive in their story." The night deepened. The hum of voices downstairs softened, then vanished. Alone in the dark, I let the tears come. They were not loud or angry, just quiet drops falling like rain on dry earth, and with each one I felt the soil of trust wash further away. The sky had been threatening rain all day. Heavy clouds rolled in from the west, the kind that turned daylight into dusk. I sat by the window of the spare room, Kane resting beside me, and watched the trees bend under the first breath of wind. My chest ached in a way that had nothing to do with the surgery. It was the ache of being left behind in the very place I should have felt safe. That morning, I had asked my daughter if she could take me to the doctor for my follow-up appointment. The stitches pulled when I moved, and the doctor had said I needed to be checked. She didn't look up from her phone. "Dad, I can't today. I've got meetings, and you know how traffic gets." I turned to my son-in-law, who was sipping coffee at the counter. "Would you mind driving me? It won't take long." He set the mug down harder than he needed to. "Call yourself an Uber. We're not your chauffeurs." The words hit me harder than any storm. I nodded slowly, trying not to let them see the hurt on my face. "Of course," I whispered. By afternoon, the house was alive with the sounds of their world. Laughter from the living room, the television blaring, the phone buzzing with notifications. I felt small in the middle of it, like a shadow no one noticed. The walls pressed closer. The air itself felt heavy, carrying the scent of rain before the first drop fell. I pulled on my old coat, the one with the torn pocket Ellen had mended years ago, and picked up my cane. "I'll just step outside a while," I said quietly. My daughter didn't answer. She was laughing at something her husband had shown her on his phone. The screen door creaked as I pushed it open. The wind met me sharp and cool, and the first drops of rain splattered against the porch. I stepped down slowly, each movement cautious, my cane sinking into the damp earth. The sky grumbled low, like an old man clearing his throat. I walked toward the street, breathing in the smell of wet pavement. For a moment, it felt good to be out of the house, away from the noise, even if the rain was falling harder. Water slid down my face, mixing with the warmth of my own breath. The cane tapped against the sidewalk, steady as a heartbeat. Halfway down the block, the ground grew slick. My foot slipped, and before I could steady myself, my body pitched forward. The cane clattered against the curb. My chest hit the ground, pain exploding through my side. The world tilted, blurred by the rain running into my eyes. I tried to push up, but my arms shook too much. For a moment I lay there, an old man sprawled on the wet street, helpless under the storm. "Sir, are you all right?" The voice came from behind me. A neighbor, Mr. Jensen from across the street, hurried over, umbrella in hand. He knelt beside me, lifting me gently. "You shouldn't be out here alone in this weather. Let's get you inside." His kindness cut deeper than the fall. I wanted to tell him why I was out here, why no one in my own house had come, but the words stuck in my throat. I let him guide me back toward the porch, my coat dripping, my cane retrieved from the gutter. We reached the steps just as my daughter opened the door. Her face tightened at the sight of me leaning on the neighbor. "Dad, what were you doing out there? You'll make yourself sick." I swallowed hard. "I asked for a ride to the doctor," I said quietly. "I thought I'd walk instead." She glanced at Mr. Jensen, her cheeks flushing. "Thank you for helping him," she said quickly, forcing a smile. He gave her a look I couldn't quite read, part pity, part disapproval, before nodding to me. "Take care of yourself, Dennis. Call if you need anything." When the door shut, silence filled the room. My daughter helped me to the sofa, though her touch was light, almost reluctant. She fetched a towel, handed it to me, and said, "You shouldn't do things like that. It makes people talk." "Talk?" I asked softly. People notice, Dad. It looks embarrassing. The towel sagged in my hands. I looked at her, searching for some trace of the little girl I had raised, the one who once clutched my hand in crowds, who ran to me when thunder scared her. All I saw was distance, as wide as the storm outside. That night, I lay awake, the rain still drumming on the roof. I thought about the fall, about the way the ground had felt so cold, about the helplessness that washed over me. But more than that, I thought about the neighbor's hand under my arm, steady and kind. A stranger had shown me the care my own blood could not. I whispered into the dark, "Ellen, if you could see this, what would you tell me to do?" My voice cracked, carried away by the sound of the rain. The answer did not come, but something settled in me that night. A quiet seed of resolve, planted in the storm. I could not stay like this forever. The morning after the storm, the world outside looked scrubbed clean. Puddles glittered in the street, and the air carried that sharp, earthy smell only rain can leave behind. Inside the house, though, nothing felt fresh. My coat still hung damp over a chair, and the ache in my ribs from the fall throbbed with every breath. I sat at the kitchen table, cane across my knees, waiting for the coffee pot to finish gurgling. My daughter breezed in, hair already styled, purse on her shoulder. She glanced at me, then away. "Dad, I hope you're feeling better. I can't have neighbors gossiping about you stumbling around in the rain again." I nodded slowly, keeping my voice calm. I asked for help to get to the doctor. "You told me to call a cab. I thought maybe a short walk would be good." She sighed, as if my words were a heavy chore. You don't understand how much pressure we're under. We're trying to manage bills, the kids, our work, and now you too. It's a lot." Her husband walked in then, sipping his coffee. "We've done plenty. You should appreciate that, Dennis." Appreciate. The word stung. I kept my eyes on the steam curling from the mug in front of me. I do appreciate. More than you know. But I'm starting to see this isn't working. For any of us. Neither of them answered. My daughter tapped her phone, her mind already elsewhere. My son-in-law muttered something about the trash needing to go out. I sat there, invisible, the decision forming in the quiet space between us. That afternoon, when the house emptied, I climbed the stairs to the small spare room and began packing. My hands trembled, not from weakness, but from something heavier, finality. I folded shirts into a worn duffel bag, tucked in a pair of boots I'd had since Ellen was alive. I placed a photo of her, the one where she was laughing with her head thrown back between the layers of clothes so it wouldn't bend. My fingers brushed the empty space where her watch should have been. The absence felt louder than any clock ticking. I gathered a few keepsakes from the dresser, a book of poems she loved, the letter she once wrote me on our 10th anniversary. Edges yellowed now with time. I left the rest. Objects can be stolen or sold, but memories cling tighter. Downstairs, the refrigerator hummed as I opened it. I pulled out a small container of soup I'd made myself the week before. No one had touched it. I warmed it slowly on the stove, ate at the table alone, and thought about how much better it tasted than the silence I'd been fed for weeks. When my daughter returned, she stopped short at the sight of the duffel bag by the door. "Dad, what are you doing?" "I'm leaving," I said plainly. Her eyes widened. "Leaving? Where would you even go?" I met her gaze steadily. "Somewhere I'm not treated like a burden." Her mouth opened, then closed. Finally, she said, "You're being dramatic. We've given you everything. Food, a roof, care after your surgery. And now you just walk out?" "Food I wasn't welcome to share," I replied quietly. "A roof built partly on my savings. Care that turned into scolding. You gave me shelter, yes, but not dignity. And without dignity, a roof is just wood and nails." Her husband snorted. "Fine. If you think you can do better, go ahead. Don't come crawling back when you realize how tough it is out there." I slid the strap of the bag over my shoulder, the weight pulling against me, but also steadying me. "I've lived tougher days than you know," I said. The silence that followed was sharp, broken only by the ticking of the wall clock. My daughter's eyes shone, but no tears fell. She stepped aside. I walked past her slowly, cane tapping on the hardwood, each step sounding louder than the last. Out on the porch, the air was cooler, the sky pale and wide. I breathed deep, filling my lungs as though for the first time in months. Across the street, Mr. Jensen waved from his yard, and I raised a hand in return. Just that small gesture reminded me the world was not all harsh. I walked down the block, the duffel heavy, my steps uneven but sure. At the corner cafe, I stopped for a bowl of chili and a slice of cornbread. The waitress poured coffee into a chipped white mug, and when she asked, "How you doing today, sir?" I found myself smiling. "Better now," I said. I ate slowly, savoring the simple meal. Around me, the clatter of dishes and hum of conversation felt alive, not hostile. I belonged here more than I had in that house. When I finished, I sat back, watching the rainwater still dripping from the eaves outside. Freedom, even dressed in uncertainty, tasted warmer than any feast served with cold hearts. That night, I rented a small room above the diner. The walls were plain, the mattress firm, but it was mine. I set Ellen's photo on the nightstand, placed the cane within reach, and whispered, "I'm starting over, love. I should have done it sooner." For the first time in months, I slept through the night, without waking to hushed voices or the weight of being unwanted. The days in the small rented room above the diner passed slowly, but they carried a strange kind of peace. The mattress was firm, the wallpaper peeling in the corners, but it was quiet. Nobody barked orders. Nobody sighed when I asked for help. In the mornings, I walked down to the counter for coffee and eggs, and the waitress always called me Hun. That little word warmed me more than I could explain. I thought maybe I could live the rest of my life that way. Small, simple, unnoticed. But secrets, like seeds, always push their way up through the soil. Mine was about to. One afternoon, I was sitting by the diner window with my newspaper when Mr. Jensen, the neighbor who had helped me during the storm, walked in. He spotted me, waved, and sat down across from me without waiting to be invited. "Dennis," he said, "folks around town are starting to wonder. You up and left your daughter's place without a word. Some are saying it was pride. Some are saying you were impossible to live with." I folded the newspaper carefully. "Is that what they think?" He leaned closer, his voice softer. "I told them that wasn't the truth. I told them I'd seen enough with my own eyes, but maybe it's time you let people know the real story." I hesitated, staring at the coffee cooling in my cup. For years, I had carried the weight of my sacrifices in silence. Fathers don't brag about what they give up. We just do it. But now, silence felt like betrayal, not of myself, but of the truth. That night, I dug through the duffel bag I had carried out of my daughter's house. At the bottom, folded between shirts, I found the manila folder I had almost left behind. Inside were bank statements, copies of checks, and even an old letter Ellen had written me when we agreed to help our daughter with her first down payment. "It's what family does," she had written in her neat, careful script. "We help her build a home." I stared at those words until they blurred. Ellen had believed it. So had I. But the home we built had turned into a prison for me. A week later, word began to spread in the neighborhood. Maybe it was Jensen talking. Maybe it was another neighbor who saw me eating alone at the diner. Maybe it was just the way gossip works in small towns. People began to ask questions. And when questions start, answers have a way of showing themselves. I heard from a cousin who called me one evening, her voice shaky. "Dennis, is it true you helped with the house, the bills? Folks are saying you've been paying for years." "Yes," I said simply. She gasped. "All this time, your daughter made it sound like she and her husband did everything themselves, like you were the one depending on them." I could hear the hurt in her tone, the betrayal of family pride, twisted into lies. Within days, the truth spread like wildfire. Old friends who had drifted away began reaching out. One man, a retired co-worker, came to see me at the diner. He laid his hand on my shoulder. "I read what people are saying. You kept that girl afloat. Don't you let them shame you. You did what any good father would do." It was strange, humbling and heavy, to hear my sacrifices spoken aloud by others. For so long, they had been hidden in bank ledgers and late-night decisions. Now they were public, and people were judging not me, but her. Back at my daughter's house, I heard from another neighbor that the walls were closing in. "They're embarrassed," he said. "Folks know now who really paid for what. Your son-in-law doesn't look so proud at work anymore. And your daughter, she's quiet these days, won't meet people's eyes." Part of me felt a bitter satisfaction, but another part, the deeper part, just felt tired. This wasn't about revenge. It was about truth. Still, the truth had its own kind of sting. The final blow came when I learned about the watch. A friend down the street told me he'd seen it online, but recognized the engraving on the back. Ellen's initials and our wedding date. He asked around, and the story reached my daughter's in-laws. They hadn't known it was sold. They were horrified. And just like that, the watch, my Ellen's memory, became the centerpiece of every whispered conversation. One evening, Jensen knocked on my door with a folded newspaper in his hand. "Dennis," he said, "they can't hide anymore." The headline read, "Local family praised for sacrifice now, faces questions over father's support." Below it, the story laid it all bare. My years of financial help, the down payment, the monthly checks, the quiet rescues. The article painted my daughter and her husband in a different light. Not generous caregivers, but dependents who had twisted the truth. I sat in the quiet of my little rented room, Ellen's photo glowing in the lamplight, and whispered, "The truth is out now, love." My chest felt lighter, not because the burden was gone, but because I wasn't carrying it alone anymore. The next morning, people nodded at me differently when I walked into the diner. There was respect in their eyes, not pity. Some clapped me on the back. Some simply said, "Good for you, Dennis." It didn't erase the hurt, but it reminded me that dignity, once lost, can be found again in the light of truth. And though my daughter's silence hung heavier than any words could, I knew this. The world finally saw me not as a burden, but as a father who had given everything. The secret was revealed. and nothing would be the same again. The invitation came not by phone or letter, but through a cousin who stopped me outside the diner. She shifted her purse from one shoulder to the other and said, "Dennis, your daughter's hosting a family dinner this weekend. She says you should come. People want to hear your side now." I looked at her, coffee cup warm in my hands. My side, or their story they want to fix? She pressed her lips together. Maybe both, but you should be there. That Saturday evening, I stood outside the house I had helped them buy. Cane in one hand, a folder tucked under the other arm. The windows glowed with light, laughter spilling into the yard. For a moment, I almost turned back. But then I thought of Ellen, of the watch sold like junk, of the rain pounding my face when no one cared. I straightened my back and walked to the door. Inside, the dining room was filled. Cousins, neighbors, even a few co-workers of my son-in-law. The table was set with polished silverware, wine glasses gleaming, roast chicken steaming in the center. My daughter froze when she saw me. Her face flushed, then stiffened. "Dad, this is a family dinner," she said quickly, as if hoping to herd me back outside. I set my cane against the sideboard and placed the folder on top of it. "Exactly," I answered. "Family." The chatter in the room quieted. Chairs creaked as people turned toward me. I opened the folder and began sliding papers onto the table. Bank statements, copies of checks, letters. Gasps rose as eyes scanned the figures. One of the cousins frowned. "Is this your account, Dennis?" I nodded. 5 years of payments, mortgage help, car repairs, bills when the lights would have gone out. My daughter's husband shot up from his chair. "This is out of line. He volunteered. We never asked." "Never asked?" My voice cut sharper than I expected. "You stood in my kitchen with your hand out. You let me pawn my retirement so you could stand in this house and call it yours." Murmurs circled the table. My daughter's hand trembled as she tried to gather the papers. "This isn't the time. People don't need to see this." "They do," I said firmly. I pulled from the folder the copy of the online ad, the photo of Ellen's gold watch. "They need to see this too. A family heirloom, sold off like clutter." A hush fell. My cousin at the far end whispered, "That was Ellen's, wasn't it? She wore it every Sunday." I nodded, my throat tight. She wanted our daughter to carry it. Instead, it was carried away for cash. The room shifted. Admiration that once belonged to my daughter drained from the guests' eyes. Some looked away. Others stared at her with disbelief. "Why didn't you say anything?" a neighbor asked me gently. "Because fathers don't keep ledgers against their children," I answered. "We keep faith." I kept faith until there was nothing left to keep. My daughter finally spoke, her voice cracking. "I was just trying to hold everything together." People expected us to look successful, to keep up. Her husband barked a short laugh. "Don't apologize to him. He's just bitter." I steadied myself on my cane and let my voice fall low but clear. "I raised you not as a servant, but as a father. And I will never beg for respect again." The silence that followed was heavier than the summer air. My daughter stared at me, tears glinting in her eyes, but refusing to fall. Around us, the guests shifted uncomfortably, the truth too sharp to ignore. Finally, an elderly aunt spoke, her tone stern. "Child, you let your pride twist into cruelty. You took from the man who gave you everything and made him feel like nothing." My daughter's face crumpled. She tried to speak, but no words came. Her husband muttered under his breath, but no one listened. The weight of the room had turned. I gathered the folder, slid the papers back inside, and straightened my tie. "Enjoy your dinner," I said quietly. "It's the last one I'll ever pay for." I picked up my cane and walked toward the door. Behind me, voices erupted. Questions, accusations, the sound of a carefully built image collapsing. I didn't turn back. Outside, the evening air wrapped around me, cooler than the heat of the crowded dining room. I paused at the gate, listening to the muffled storm of voices inside. For the first time in years, I felt steady, not triumphant, not vengeful, just steady. As I walked away, streetlights flickered on, one by one, guiding me down the quiet block. I whispered into the dusk, "Ellen, I kept my word. They finally know." The night answered with silence, but it was a silence that felt clean. Spring came gently that year. The air softened, trees along the sidewalks dressed themselves in green again, and the world smelled of lilacs and fresh earth. I had moved into Rosa's house, an old friend from church, widowed like me, with children and grandchildren who treated me not as an obligation, but as family. Her place wasn't large, and it didn't shine with expensive fixtures or polished hardwood, but it was warm. On Sunday afternoons, her kitchen filled with laughter and the clatter of dishes. I would sit at the end of the table, the kids asking me questions about the old days, and I found myself smiling more than I had in years. Nobody asked me to hide away. Nobody sighed when I reached for a second helping. The chair I sat in was mine, and I belonged there. One evening, Rosa found me in the backyard, crouched low with a packet of seeds in hand. "You're planting?" she asked, smiling. "Just a few," I said, pressing the seeds into the soil. "Ellen always loved marigolds, said they kept the pests away and brought the butterflies." Rosa bent beside me. "Then we'll have butterflies this summer." I looked at the row of fresh dirt, neat and waiting. For the first time in a long while, it felt like the ground beneath my feet wanted me to grow roots again. Not everything was healed, of course. There were still nights when the echo of my daughter's words, "We are not your servants," rang in my ears. There were mornings when I woke with the image of Ellen's watch burning in my mind, the memory of its golden face now tarnished by betrayal. But grief and betrayal, I learned, can sit side by side with peace, if you let them. One afternoon, as I was sitting on Rosa's porch with a glass of sweet tea, a car slowed in front of the house. My daughter stepped out. Her face was thinner, her shoulders slumped. She held nothing in her hands. No gifts, no excuses, just herself. I stayed seated as she walked up the path. "Dad," she said, her voice low, trembling. I came to say, "I'm sorry." I studied her, the girl I had raised, the woman who had hurt me deeper than anyone else could. "Sorry for what, exactly?" I asked gently. She swallowed hard. "For letting pride turn me cruel, for forgetting what you gave, for selling things that weren't mine to sell, for making you feel like a stranger in your own family." Silence stretched between us. I could hear the wind rattling the leaves, the laughter of Rosa's grandchildren inside. Finally, I nodded. "I forgave you months ago," I said. "But forgiveness doesn't mean we go back to how things were. It means you start fresh, and you earn back trust, day by day." Her eyes filled with tears. "Can I at least visit? The kids miss you." I thought about it, then pointed to the marigold bed, just beginning to sprout. "Come help me weed this patch next week. Bring the kids. That's how we'll start." She nodded quickly, relief softening her face. For the first time in years, I saw not the woman hardened by status and appearances, but the little girl who once ran barefoot through sprinklers, calling me Daddy. That night, after she left, I stood by the garden, the soil damp and rich beneath my shoes. I thought of the long road from that first sharp cry in her living room, "We are not your servants," to this quiet apology at Rosa's gate. The pain had been real, the wounds deep, but out of them had come something stronger. Clarity, freedom, a new place to belong. I raised my glass of tea toward the fading sky. "To you, Ellen," I whispered. "I kept us going, and I'm still standing." The garden was silent, but in the stillness, I felt something like an answer. Maybe in the unfurling of each marigold, in the laughter of children who weren't ashamed to sit beside me, in the quiet dignity of a chair that was mine. Her spirit would keep reminding me that family isn't who shares your blood. Family is who stands with you when you are weakest. And so I stepped inside to join the others, leaving the night air behind me, ready at last for a future that felt like home. If this story touched you, let me know in the comments by typing a simple 1 or 0. Your voice matters here. This is our space for true stories that carry both pain and hope. Don't forget to subscribe and stay with us, because the next story may be the one that speaks straight to your heart.